Welcome to part 6 of the Clash of Worlds. Now we're going to take a look at the Columbus effect. So on August 3rd, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He has his 3 ships. The Santa Maria is the largest of them. It's not a big ship, though. And the Nina and the Pinta are smaller still. And in total, the crew is only 85 men. Now, the crew are most concerned about whether or not Columbus is right in his prediction on how long it's going to take to get to China, right? What if his calculations are wrong? And they are, right? And so, needless to say, as they went day after day beyond the predicted length that Columbus had said it was going to take them to get to China, they became more and more agitated, more and more nervous. And it was probably a good thing they finally spotted land, because the crew was on the edge of mutiny when October 12th, 1492 rolled around, and they finally sighted landfall. All right. Now, where that is, we're not exactly sure, but historians, we debate this, and probably somewhere in the Bahamas, right? He'll make landfall, and he'll have a royal notary come out, and they'll take formal possession of the new territory. And then he'll begin to sail around the Caribbean. He'll reach Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, right? He'll run across the locals there, right, the Taínos, which he'll call Indians, well, Indios. Right? He'll coin that phrase. Remember, he thinks he's in the Indies. So these are Indios people. Now, he's brought with him a Arabic-speaking translator, right? Because the spice trade was dominated by Arab tradesmen in the Indian Ocean. So if you have an Arabic translator, then once you find some of these traders, you can converse with them. And that translator is pretty puzzled. He can't find anybody amongst the Taínos to speak Arabic, or any of the other Native Americans they're running across. Columbus also finds it pretty interesting and strange that these people are almost naked. Why are they not wearing Chinese silks? Right? It's one of the first things he notes about them. But despite that, he's absolutely convinced he's done it. And the Taínos, well, they find Columbus interesting too, because they see these tall ships and these iron weapons, right? And they find them very interesting because they're worried about another group of Native Americans in the Caribbean. There's a group in the of Native Americans in the Caribbean called the Caribs. The Carib tribe are cannibals. Now, it's where we get the word Caribbean from, right? But what they are, they're Vikings of the Caribbean. They would sail around island. Their 2 favorite things is to attack a village, and they'll grab 1 or 2 groups of people, young boys or pregnant women. The young boys, they would castrate them, and then they're not producing testosterone. They get fat. When they get fat enough, then, you eat them. Kind of a very twisted Hansel and Gretel thing, except with the true grim endings. Okay. Pregnant women is a little bit more revolting. What they would do is they would wait till the woman was almost term, and then they would kill her and carve the baby out and eat the baby, literally a form of human veal. Right? So, needless to say, the idea of Columbus and his men being able to protect them, that's a very inviting thing. Now, Columbus will take some Taínos with him back to Spain as slaves, and he'll come there with great news for the Spanish king. We did it, we arrived, and we made it. We are in the Indies, we've made it to China. China's just right to the northeast. So Columbus comes back with this great news that he's found a route to China, right? And the king and queen of Spain, of course, give him more ships, more men, and send him back that way in order to create a permanent colony. This is the second of 4 total journeys that he's going to take, right? When he arrives back into the Caribbean, the Spaniards that he had left behind on his first trip are all dead. They have run afoul of the Taínos Indians, and they decided that their protection from the Carib weren't worth the way they were being treated, and they had killed them all. Columbus is going to take out a revenge on the Taínos, and ultimately the Taínos and the Carib are going to be effectively exterminated by the Spaniards by the end of Spaniard settlement. Okay, he'll set up the first permanent Spanish settlement, though, there on Hispaniola, right? It'll be poorly managed, and like I said, he'll find himself on the 3rd journey returning in chains, and on the 4th journey, pretty much disaster. And he's going to die not poor, but not to the vaulted status that he thought he would. And remember, he's still going to die in 1506. He's going to die still firmly believing that he had found China, when a lot of people by this point are going, this is something else. This is something entirely different. But of course, it makes sense, and this is why we don't call these continents Columbia or Christophica, the United States of Christophica. I kind of like that, right? That's the reason why we don't call it that, right? Because Columbus would have said, well, don't call it Columbia, call it China, right? He would not have agreed with anybody that said that. The name itself comes from a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller. Martin Waldseemüller is going to take letters written by a guy named Amerigo Vespucci, another explorer who made at least one known trip to the Americas and possibly two. But he's going to use a series of letters provided by Vespucci, some of them real and some of them are actually frauds, and he's going to use them to create the first drawing of a coastline of these new discovered continents, right? The Waldseemüller map. So here he's got these land masses that he knows they exist, and he knows it's not China. He's got to give them a name, so he takes Amerigo and he Latinizes it into its feminine form, and there you go, America, right? And so that's how we end up getting that name. So does Columbus get anything named after him in the aftermath of his great discovery? Well, yeah, probably not what he wanted, though. What Columbus will get named after him, though not in his lifetime, is the Columbian Exchange. And that is the exchange between the Americas and Europe, Eurasia, of all kinds of different things back and forth. Food, livestock, fauna, and yes, even disease, right? But let's focus on the positive stuff first, right? Food stocks will exchange back and forth. From the Americas, Europe will get things like corn, tomato, potatoes, tobacco, cocoa, vanilla. I mean, look at these things. They're all really important. Corn is a very primary staple grain in pretty much every society in the Americas and in Europe anyways. Tomatoes. What was Italian food like before Columbus that there's no tomatoes? It's hard to imagine. No potatoes, which means you can't have an Irish potato famine. You're going to have a turnip famine instead, if not for Columbus's discovery. Tobacco, some would say that that's still important to them, right? But it becomes a very important commodity, certainly back then. Cocoa, which you make chocolate. So that means before Columbus, there's no chocolate in Europe. And if you don't have chocolate, your fallback is clearly vanilla, but you don't have that either. So the New World, if you will, brought a whole lot of very interesting things that changed the diets of the Old World. Meanwhile, livestock made it to the New World, stuff that they didn't have before. Those heavy beasts of burdens, things like horses and cattle. And yeah, pigs aren't beasts of burden, but they have to get a mention here, right? Because pigs are magical animals. They eat garbage and turn it into bacon. That is true wizardry right there. And then, of course, we finally got to mention the exchange of disease, which was, well, for the most part, a one-way exchange, right? Diseases like smallpox, influenza, yellow fever, malaria were all unknown to the American continents and will be introduced by the Europeans' arrival with a devastating effect, right? They had no immunities to these, and as a result, they're going to die in large, large numbers. Did any diseases from the New World make it to the Old World? Well, we argue this, but we believe syphilis came there from the Americas to Europe, but that's pretty much about it. So the question lies, why is it that Europe and Asia and Africa had exposure to all these diseases and the Americans didn't? Well, some of it's obvious, right? We have the end of Beringia, which means clearly these diseases developed afterwards, but also there's the issue of that domestication of animals at play here. When you take a look at a lot of diseases today, they will often host in other animals. This current corona outbreak that we're all dealing with, we know that type of corona originates in bats, and then there's some debate on some other animals that it might also host in, okay? And so Europe and Asia have this long history of these large animals that they've been in close contact with for generations that carry things like smallpox, cowpox, chickenpox, and other diseases. So while they're not immune to them, they've developed resistance to them. Well, In the Americas, this doesn't happen. So when the Europeans arrive, there's no immunities built up. There's no natural resistance to this. And so smallpox can be devastating. And so can these other diseases like influenza and yellow fever and malaria. And so it hits the population and it wipes them out. It's estimated by what data they can compile that in any place where you would have a major disease outbreak, it would typically wipe out somewhere around 90% of the population in that region. Really take a minute to think about this. What would your society look like right now if 90% of the population was just gone, just dead? We already know because, again, we can use Corona as a frame of reference, the economic shutdown by everybody being locked indoors. We haven't had a 9% die-off rate, but we had a lot of businesses shut down, and it's had a major impact on our society as a whole. So now picture for a minute if every 9 people out of 10 are dead. You are one out of 10 in the survivor category. Emergency services, that going to stay operating? What about the power, right? You know, what about cable? Well, cable's probably out anyways, right? So you got all these things that the societal structures that will break down, and that's going to happen with a lot of these Native American populations.